Good morning, good evening, good afternoon. We are meeting from different time zones. My name is Mary Movisi, and I'm going to be sharing a little talk today on trauma-informed yoga for the journey with cancer. Gratitude to the community and to the organizers of the Global Yoga Therapy Day, and I've been enjoying the sharing of my fellow colleagues and really the innovators, the living legends, as I call them, that are also making the presentations. So I want to just take a moment of gratitude for that. And so I'm going to end up sharing my screen and sharing the presentation with you and talking through it. And at the end, take some time to feel free to reach out to me with any further questions that you may have. I'm happy to answer them. And I'm very happy to share the knowledge that I have. I appreciate the idea that we really don't own anything. And this path of teaching and sharing is about educating. And so may education be accessible for all. So let's just take a moment, take a few breaths, and arrive. So I began my work in yoga about over 15 years ago, and my very first client was a client that was in the kind of stage of thriving, of going past the journey with cancer, and is into kind of in the annual reviews just to see that the cancer hadn't come back. And so, and since that, the private work that I've done, a lot of it has been working with individuals on the journey of cancer through various continuums. Most recently, one of the clients from Beloved that was preferred to come more to group classes than the individual yoga therapy, ended up transitioning. So I've experienced this journey of cancer, which is vast and not the same for everyone. And so yoga is an ideal method to share because of the individuality of this imbalance of cancer. So thank you, and I'm going to begin to share my screen with all of you as we go into the journey. So I put on the slide my contact information. Feel free to write it down, and it's easy that my name is the website and also the studio that I've been managing and running, and the founder of Beloved Yoga. You can also access me through that. So let's just kind of broad view of the trauma-informed lens. And so the journey with cancer can be traumatic, leaving scars that are not easily removed, flashbacks from diagnoses to treatment that stay embedded and create a hypervigilance around one's life. Often the gifts from the journey with cancer can be a new profound appreciation for life and relationships, as well as a renewed commitment to living a healthy and balanced life. What determines this outcome? And what determines this outcome has a lot to do with the individual's history and also the care that they receive on the journey with cancer. Adding the lens of trauma-informed is a way of extending compassion to this journey. Recently in the DSM manuals, which are kind of the Bible of psychotherapy, there is in addition of cancer being listed under traumatic stress, and sometimes it can even go under the category of PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSI, post-traumatic stress injury. And it's important to recognize it and acknowledge it. Sometimes as a culture, we don't always have the ways of acknowledging really how intense something is, how traumatic something is. And so to be able to at least ask the question is really important. And the symptoms that come from this experience is what allows us to recognize, okay, there is traumatic stress. There is symptoms that are being demonstrated. And in the field of yoga therapy, we cannot do the psychotherapy aspect of it. It's really important. And so often when this comes up for an individual, they are working with therapists. And I'm very grateful. There are several oncologist psychotherapists in my region that I do partner with. And so it's important to know that, and important to also have that resource as part of your team that you can refer out to. Now with the trauma-informed lens, we have a program at Beloved that I co-developed with Heather, and we share it and we teach it. But today I'm sharing some of the guiding principles, and I'm sharing it because this is the lens in which the method, the yoga therapeutic method, is used and shared. And I wanted to speak to each of them just to also reflect on the journey with cancer, to give us some perspective of why this can be traumatic. The first one is the choice is power. And the journey with cancer can feel very powerless. The sense of hopelessness can create traumatic stress just in that moment of diagnosis. And offering choice is essential. And often on the continuum of cancer, where when a person is on that journey, they're not having too many options. There's kind of the oncologist or their team has a path, and the individual wants to get rid of cancer, and so they're very focused, but there isn't a lot of options that are given. And so for this tool of yoga therapy, to remember to offer that in a journey that may not be there, and that can really be significant in lessening the traumatic stress of the cancer journey. The commitment to focus on present moment, body orientation, breath, sensation awareness, and the sense of overwhelm that is real between treatments, surgeries, doctor's appointments, and professional and householder changes. The practice of staying in the present moment can be medicinal. So just as the very first Yoga Sutra invites, Atta Yoga Anushasanam, that Atta, the call, it's a call to action. Are you present? Because if the mind is scattered, it's very then easy for the mind to run away with you. And so the central teaching is the tools that invite the practitioner to remain present. And this is essential, especially when there is treatment going on. Maybe, many have heard of the kind of the fog, the brain fog that occurs from chemotherapy and other treatments. And so creating a balance for that, and the idea that we're not offering these tools so that they check out, we're offering the tools so that they check in. And the last two, I'll just I won't talk too much, it's shared more in the method, but it's use of rhythmic, repetitive, and hold methodology. And this is really at the heart of Swasta and Viniyoga. Swasta is the path through the Mohans, and Viniyoga through Gary Kraft's style. And this is a rhythm that's offering a soothing rhythm for the nervous system. And so knowing the nervous system is such a major regulator, how we move, how we breathe, and this rhythmic, repetitive, and hold method is very effective, and gives control to the practitioner to manage themselves. I can't go too much into it with this presentation, but it is something that is expanded on more in our programs. And the last one, to cultivating joyful, all-filled curiosity through education and exploration, to educate about how amazing they are. They may be spiraling down into what is wrong with themselves versus what is right. And I just remember I was on this journey with a diagnosis of cancer, and I immediately upon hearing this, I was like, what is wrong with my body? What have I been doing wrong? And I spiraled, and I've heard this several times, kind of really doing this almost hyper investigation and trying to figure out what's wrong with me. And what yoga therapy can offer is the remembrance of what is right. And so to not lose sight of that. So let's continue for the case of yoga therapy. And I want to read this statement from page 67 from the Anti-Cancer Living that Lorenzo Cohen and Allison Jeffries wrote. I based my work on this book. This book is a book that I have every individual that I work with read. And it's a book that carries us through the sessions, whether they're 4, 5, 6, 7, 10, 20. And I've never had one person in these, since the books come out, ever say, this is rejected. And most of the time they take it back to their oncology practice and their cancer care center, and they share it. And so I just want to say thank you to the Anderson Center, to Lorenzo Cohen, Dr. Cohen, and Dr. Allison Jeffers. So let me read this quote. I feel it captures it all. We must consistently remember that cancer cells are cells that have lost all balance, all semblance of normal behavior. In fact, they are cells that have become genetically programmed to continue to morph and change, with the sole purpose to being able to escape any kind of homeostatic regulation or any kind of evolutionary constraints, be they biological or lifestyle. We see that these cells are also hijack multiple systems within our body, modifying gene expression with the sole purpose of allowing them to stay alive. This is why treating cancer has thus far been so confounding. Cancer cells are constantly changing because of factors that cannot be addressed with surgery, radiation, and drugs. We simply won't have effective treatment if we don't bring the massive lifestyle component of cause into play. And this is the call to the personalized yoga journey that invites lifestyle shifts and daily rituals and self-care to be amplified in a person's life. And I've offered a definition of yoga therapy. I always feel it's important to know what organizations such as IOIT, how they define it, and also to reflect for yourself. And so I'm offering the one that I have, that yoga therapy is an approach where the tools of yoga are personalized to support the individual to make lifestyle changes to support healing. And to dive into that, yoga is not one thing. It is a process of practice and a philosophy that addresses attitude, lifestyle, and the tools of regulation. And yoga therapy is the application of that to the individual. The lens of trauma-informed yoga is modern. It's not something that you find Sanskrit for, or really any ancient languaging for. There's some things that come close to it, but it offers the yoga therapist, the yoga teacher, a heightened awareness of the person in front of them. And what that heightened awareness can do can create an incredibly compassionate presence. And if you know about the importance of presence, then you know how vital it is in these relationships between an individual and a yoga therapist and a yoga teacher. So that may the trauma-informed lens support you in having that compassionate presence. So just a little overview, the mix of 6 that Dr. Cohen and Allison Jeffries offers, I've listed it here. And then in the box with the kind of the cream background, this is kind of how I've looked at that and also pulled it out of the Ashtanga method of Patanjali. I believe that method that framework has all of this in it. It just addresses it a little differently, but I've also made some shifts to it to expand the lifestyle habits. I do teach this more comprehensively in a course called Befriending Cancer, and I partner with an oncologist dietitian, a new core. And at the bottom of this, there is a article that was recently we wrote for the IOIT that you can read more about it. But I share that in that program. So I'm really excited to offer it to you today. And this just gives you a little overview. I want to just address kind of, what is the drive? So in yoga therapy and even Ayurveda, it's the type of cancer it's not like there's so many remedies for all these different types of cancer. There isn't this type of breath for this type of cancer and then doesn't work for this type of cancer. It's all moving towards optimal well-being. And well-being is achieved in yoga and Ayurveda by the appropriate circulation of prana through the rivers, the nadis of the being. And breath movement, mind, and lifestyle habits all need attention in the pursuit of the optimal well-being. And this has to do with Agni, with the fire that also motivates the movement of prana. And the use of that energy needs attention depending on where the person is on the continuum with cancer. And so I want to always never lose sight that I'm speaking in really general terms. It's hard to do this in 45 minutes. But there is very significant things that are looked at during treatment. It's looked at prior, post-surgery, after kind of that stage of healing. And they're starting to change the languaging of not even using this languaging of remission, but the movement into thriving. And sometimes the movement into the end of life and transition. Right now, I know someone that's right in that phase, and they want to practice during that phase. And so just know that these tools are useful throughout the continuum of cancer. But it's still looking towards achieving the optimal well-being for the person in front of us. So I want to touch on each of those limbs just a little bit to maybe encourage and inspire you. And these are things that I know it's new, but maybe the way it's being presented will offer some perspective. So the fact that the nervous system is a central regulator for all the systems of the body, and that stress is what the signals of the nervous system picks up. And stress is important. It actually motivates and stimulates life and growth. But we have so many studies that show what happens with chronic stress, and that it does have amplified effect on the progression of cancer and into metastasis. Stress is also linked to inflammation. And if you step maybe way back, you might look at cancer as a major inflammatory imbalance disease. Breathing is a management tool that we can utilize to regulate stress and the effects of it on the body by learning ways to access the parasympathetic system. And therefore, that can lower inflammation. I cannot get into the science of this during this talk, but know that there is, and if you would like any resources, please reach out to me. I'm happy to share the studies that speak to these markers and to what's happening. And, doing this presentation during a COVID global pandemic, and where they're already seeing how much stress affects when someone gets a virus and the effects of it on the body. So this learning is important in dealing with imbalances of the body. So I'll just want to share like the first two checks that I do is I will always check diaphragmic movement, and to see that there isn't any paradoxal breathing, or sometimes called reverse breathing patterns of the diaphragm. There is a natural attunement that systems of the body have, and so does the diaphragm, which is a major muscle of the breath. Based on life experience, the diaphragm can shift its nature, and instead of inhaling and the diaphragm lowers and expands and contracts, it can do the opposite. You can inhale and actually pull it up, and then when you exhale, you relax it down. And why that's a dilemma is it minimizes the optimization of regulation of oxygen and carbon dioxide. The phrenic nerve isn't as effective in managing it. And also it can really keep a person from entering true parasympathetic mode. And so anxiety, there can be a lean in towards anxiety with those breath patterns. And the other is the focus on nostril breathing. Another shout out to one of the New York bestsellers over the last few months, Breathe by he's a journalist, James Nestor, and a great research and look at breath, but fascinating study that he did on mouth breathing versus nostril breathing. And this emphasis that we have in nostril breathing in yoga is significant. And there are now studies that show how significant it is, from managing our sleep to managing our stress to managing all of the systems of the body, blood pressure, diabetes, so forth. And I have a little toolkit that's for each limb. And so I've just written in here, diaphragmic, Dirga breath, Samavriti, and left nostril breath. It's important that you kind of study these with someone that you trust, and also study them for yourself first before you share them. But they're very powerful, and there's a lot of wonderful studies around the left nostril breath and nostril breathing, nostril valving, and its effectiveness in healing. So now let's move to movement. And with treatment especially, there is the lean towards neuropathy, which is real. And the neuropathy can be healed. It may be permanent. And so the development of proprioception and interoception awareness is critical for the sense of safety within oneself. The movement qualities that are enhanced and reflected both in breath work and movement is smooth, naturally rhythmic, and complete. Circulation is important, and movement is essential to support circulation. And I put in this study about kind of how there's a lot of recognition that weight loss and skeletal muscle mass loss do contribute to the progress we make on the journey with cancer. So in the practice, in the movement practice, that repetition, rhythmic hold, the hold is very specific to develop muscular strength. And of course, we have to meet the individual where they are. Developing muscle mass may look different when someone is at the beginning of the journey, in treatment, or post-surgery and post-treatment. But to not underestimate yoga's and its tools ability in asana to develop strength. Sthira versus only ease and sukha. The studies of yoga and cancer really focus on how effective yoga is for emotional and stress management, and that there is a lack of studies showing how effective it is in building proprioception, interoception, and muscle mass. I think there's a lot of room for that left still. The mind. And this is where bhavana I speak to. This is often invited as a as the very first thing that was spoken to, like, what is the attitude that you want to cultivate, that the practitioner wants to cultivate? And it's very led by them. There's processes to these that are trauma informed. So I'm never telling the person what they need to cultivate. It comes out of a precise kind of inquiry process, and they reach that place and they affirm it and they hold it, and then I offer ways of embodying it, of practicing it, and bringing it into the daily life. The use of dharana, senses with awe and wonder to gather the mind into a single pointed focus. This goes back to the limbs of pratyahara and dharana. I don't think we can underestimate the value of learning the skill of focus and the necessity of developing a contemplative daily practice. I believe everyone can do this, and you can start with 1 to 3 minutes, and there's different tools that I share that I'm happy to share with you. But I know we can all think of ideas, but we really have to think about what meets the person and meets their lifestyle, but to make it accessible. It's also really helpful to create recordings, and you can put it on, they can put it on their phone, you can send it to them, because it's when someone is in the journey, there's a lot going on in the journey with cancer. There's a lot of activities around this. And so instead of asking the person to hold themselves, give them tools that hold them. Make recordings for them, send it to them, create a list for them to access, maybe recordings that you personally really feel are useful and can support the individual. And then we're at the last limb, lifestyle habits. And this has to do with sangha and social engagement. Support is critical. Nourishment. And nourishment is often the first conversation that I have, and I focus and often recommend working with a specialist in oncology nutrition. I have one that I work with very specifically, a new core, and we've worked on several individuals together, and it's been very positive and helpful, but it's also recognition of scope of practice, that unless I've been trained in that, I can really only speak very minimally to that. And so I defer to a team to support the individual. The other layer is relationships and sleep awareness. Sleep hygiene is huge. We know that sleep deprivation increases just a chance of cancer just in itself. And then when you're on the journey, it can really minimize the progress of moving towards healing. So sleep is a conversation that needs to be had, and the rituals around sleep to be spoken to. And this is where yoga nidra can be very helpful, offering and creating rituals around sleep for the individual, around nourishment, around medication. When people are going into treatment, I often speak to, like, how are you receiving that medicine? Are you taking a moment and inviting it into yourself and asking for it to do the work, and then moving out with, minimal effect as possible, versus really ignoring all the medicine and just taking it and not even thinking about it. There is very little in yoga that teaches us about not being present. So whether we're taking a phone call, whether we're eating a meal, whether we're taking medication, the sense of presence is always there. And if you look at the states of consciousness, it's the ability to remain awake throughout our daily life that can support the idea of enlightenment. That's a bigger topic for another day. And I'm a huge fan of apps, and I think there's so many great ones out there. There's room for an app on the journey with cancer. I would love to partner with anyone who wants to help create it. I think it's necessary and needed. And you can also recordings can be listened to during surgery and treatment. Really amazing for what it does for the nervous system. So this is a little overview of the different limbs and sharing a little bit from my world. I hope it inspires you. I want to just kind of share this recent study that's come out that it states that in 2020, about 520,000 Americans are expected to die of cancer. And the thing that is so tragic about this is that more than 40 years ago, former head of Harvard epidemiology and pioneering breast cancer researcher Brian McMahon concluded one of the most important contributions of epidemiology to the fight against cancer has been the demonstration that many of the prevalent forms of human cancer are preventable. And perhaps the greatest preventative work we can do is pay attention to our well-being. If cancer finds its way into our lives, into the lives of the individuals we work with, may yoga support, may yoga therapy be a tool of application and offer tools to be held with dignity and integrity in the journey. I want to just close by just taking a moment, taking a few breaths. I have a new book out, and in this book, I have a lot of practices that I have shared today with you, and I have another, the other book is percolating on this journey with befriending cancer through yoga, the trauma-informed yoga, so that will probably take a few years to finally get out, but I wanted to share this resource with you. And I'd love to just close by taking a few breaths together. And maybe just taking a moment to inhale and open up the arms and reach out or reach up or reach down. And then as you exhale, feel that drawing in of the diaphragm. And then do that a couple more times. And when you inhale, feel the expansion across the lower ribs, lower back, this openness even in the lower abdomen and across the rib cage, and then exhale and feel that drawing in and hug. And one more time, this upward lift of energy reaching up and exhale. Let's take a moment to just let everything settle. Receive my gratitude. Thank you for listening, taking time. Namaha, namaste. Reach out if you have any questions. Continue to support individuals on the journey with cancer, and know how powerful yoga therapy is to support the journey of well-being. Have a beautiful day.